Joining us now for the interview, I'm very pleased to say, is Michael Cohen, Donald Trump's one-time personal attorney and the author of this new book, which is already at the top of the charts. It's called Disloyal, a Memoir, the true story of the former personal attorney to President Donald J. Trump. I read it cover to cover. I did not intend to, but I started at the beginning and didn't put it down until it was over. Mr. Cohen, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I know you have a lot of choices about who to talk to about this. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you very much for having me.
Let me just start by asking how you're doing. I know you're back at home. You're under home confinement. You had a strange circumstance where you were out on furlough and then put back in Otisville, and then a judge intervened so that you're back at home. It's got to have been a real whipsaw.
Yeah, this has been some ordeal. I mean, some people have said I'm the first political prisoner in my own country based upon failing to sign over my constitutional rights. And I really do have to thank the lawyer, Danya Perry, who did a brilliant job in the order to show cause, and Judge Hellerstein, whose opinion could not have been more accurate by calling the actions retaliatory. I mean, the Department of Justice remanded me back to prison while I was sitting in a waiting room, expecting to get an answer as to why the first paragraph that they gave to me was so violative of anyone's First Amendment rights. Next thing I know, there's three marshals standing behind me. Mr. Cohen, stand up and face the wall. And not only did they handcuff me, which was completely unnecessary anyway, I'm not a risk. I scored the lowest on possible numbers when it comes to the BOP, but they shackled me as well. I mean, this was a rough experience.
Wow. In terms of your life now and what your life is like under home confinement and releasing this book, I know there are multiple ongoing investigations that seem to have been triggered by or that intersect with the testimony that you've given, investigations by the New York State Attorney General and the Manhattan District Attorney, potentially some federal investigations out of the U.S. Attorney's offices in Eastern and Southern districts in New York. And I know you can't talk about the ongoing live investigations, but are you in an ongoing way working with any investigators or providing testimony, or is that still part of your life, or is that something that's in the past?
So you're right. I'm not permitted to discuss them, other than to say that there are ongoing investigations into all of the actions that everybody has heard about for so long, including the Supreme Court case that now exists in order to obtain Mr. Trump and the Trump Organization's tax returns.
You write in the book that you didn't have access in detail to Trump taxes, but we know that you had access to financial documents from the Trump Organization because you testified about it in great detail, in poetic detail in front of Congress in terms of basically what you described as sort of tax fraud or insurance fraud, potentially bank fraud, or efforts at that by the Trump Organization as the president routinely inflated or deflated the value of his assets depending on who was asking. If Cy Vance or other investigators do get access to the kind of financial records that you testified about, what do you expect? Do you think that is stuff that's all going to be beyond the statute of limitations? Do you think that will be stuff that poses a threat to the president now?
I think it poses a tremendous threat to the president, which of course is why he elected not to release his tax returns. Other than that, again, they are ongoing investigations, and it's probably best if I don't discuss any of the terms that or any questions that they've put before me.
Let me ask you about the campaign finance charges, which you pled guilty to. The thing that I have never understood, and I have pursued this story as hard as I've pursued anything in the Trump era, and nobody's been able to explain this to me. Why were you the only one charged? You write in great detail about sort of coming up with this plan to cover up the payment, which was an illegal payment, with Alan Weisselberg. We've seen the checks that you provided to Congress, including at least one signed by one of the president's sons. It's clear that the Trump Organization was used to sort of launder that repayment. It's clear that AMI and David Pecker were involved in strands of this scheme. Why is Michael Cohen the only person who was charged?
Because they elected to make me into the scapegoat. I did what I did. I took responsibility for it. But Mr. Trump, Alan Weisselberg, Don. So, just to correct you for a second there, Rachel, it wasn't just Don Jr.'s signature that was on some of the checks. The president's signature was on two of the checks at the very beginning, which I provided to Congress as part of the open house testimony. Why I'm the only one, it doesn't make sense. As I stated, I was acting at the direction of and for the benefit of Mr. Trump. And how I became this guy, I'm not the one who had the affair. He did. I am the dummy who paid $130,000 to keep it quiet. But this was my conversation with Mr. Trump, with Alan Weisselberg and others, and I did it in order to protect him. And I guess the thank you that I got from my loyal boss was Michael Cohen should, as I once said, take a bullet for him and lose everything. Lose my freedom, my company, my law license, my family's happiness, everything. To me, I'm with you. I don't understand it.
The president is at least, though, named as individual one by prosecutors, and you in your allocution made very clear what you just made here in terms of the fact that this was directed by him for his benefit, and you were acting out his wishes, and so he's therefore the most culpable person. You make a point as almost the very last thing you say in the book, which I wanted to ask you about because I think it may relate to this. President's named as individual one. You went to prison for those felonies. He's clearly the person who directed the commission of those felonies. But you say at the very end of the book that the president and Attorney General William Barr ousted the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York and tried to install effectively the president's golfing buddy as the new U.S. Attorney there because the president, in your view, wanted to arrange for himself to be indicted while he's still in office, because that would give him the opportunity to pardon himself after he lost the election. I just wanted to make sure that I understand the point that you're making there. Just ask you to elaborate on that a little bit, because I'm not sure I understand.
My theory is that if he loses, there's still the time between the election and the time that the next president would take office. And during that time, my suspicion is that he will resign as president. He will allow Mike Pence to take over, and he will then go ahead and have Mike Pence pardon him. And it's a very, let's just say, it's a very Nixon type of event. And it was probably discussed between Roger Stone and President Trump at some point, that this is certainly one way to avoid any potential prison time.
I suppose if he was going to do something like that, he could arrange for the type of pardon that Nixon in fact got, where Nixon hadn't been charged with anything. It was a prospective pardon that he basically arranged from Ford so as to make sure that he'd never be indicted after he left office. I suppose that same sort of arrangement could apply there, even if he wasn't in fact charged.
Though we have to remember that it doesn't apply to state charges, nor does it apply to the charges that will be brought by Cy Vance's office.
Yeah. Let me ask you, Michael, about something that you describe in detail, which is also something that I've sort of spent a long time chasing, which is this unusual story. This is page 249 of your book, chapter 12, which has got a lot of great stuff in it. And you talk about...
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I was like, ooh, 12, this is my jam. This is the part for me. So you write that the president effectively sort of flipped a house in Palm Beach. You describe it as an architectural nightmare, which I found effective. But he made a profit on that in excess of $50 million. And what you write about in chapter 12 is that the president told you that although the person who bought that house from him for this $50 million plus profit was a Russian fertilizer billionaire, the president told you that he believed the actual money was Putin's. Quote, "The oligarchs are just fronts for Putin," Trump told me. "He puts them into wealth to invest his money. That's all they're doing, investing Putin's money." And then you say, in your words, Trump was convinced the real buyer of that house was Vladimir Putin. Was he speaking seriously and literally there? Did he actually think that Putin had arranged this $50 million windfall for him?
Well, I don't know what he was thinking. I can only tell you, which I did in the book. I can recount the conversation. He believes that all of the Russian oligarchs are basically pawns of Vladimir Putin. He controls all of them, I guess very much to the same extent that Mohammed bin Salman had the ability within which to lock up all of his relatives and other members of the royal family for money, right? Trump is keen on this power, and whether it's Putin, Mohammed bin Salman, the Kim Jong-uns, the Maderos, it's the power that he's so involved with and so in search of, that this is exactly what he believes. He believes that Putin controls all of Russia and all of its wealth, and anything like the purchase of this home had to have been through or with the permission of Vladimir Putin.
And you elaborate on that idea some when you talk about what you think was Trump's sort of orientation toward Putin and Russia during the campaign. You say, when Trump lost the election, he expected to lose the election, he wanted to do all he could to enable him to be able to borrow money from people in Putin's circle, and that meant sucking up to the Russians. A large part of the posturing and praising of Putin was a way to keep the Trump organization's options open with the Russian leader. So was he was explicit with you about this, or you were discerning this in terms of what you thought was behind his behavior?
No, this is what's behind his behavior. Donald Trump, again, they're looking for and to do a project in Russia for many, many years, even prior to my joining the Trump organization in 2007. He's fixated on the wealth of Vladimir Putin and all of the opportunities that come with it. You have to remember, and I've said this many times, and I've said it under oath to the House and the Senate, as well as my open testimony. Donald Trump never thought he was going to win this election. He actually didn't want to win this election. This was supposed to be, and it's how we started it, the greatest political infomercial in the history of politics. So if you take that line and you add to it the Trump Tower Moscow project, you'll understand that this was a branding deal. That's all that the presidential campaign started out as. This was a branding opportunity in order to expand worldwide. There's only one problem.
Yeah.
There's only one problem. He won.
Yeah. Oops. The way you describe the Trump Tower Moscow project is grander than I had previously understood. 120 floors, the free penthouse for Putin, luxury condos, a hotel, a gigantic spa.
Is that not a brilliant idea, by the way?
The largest
if you
tower
want to
in
raise the price, if you want to raise the price per square foot, you give to probably the richest man in the world and certainly the most powerful in Russia, the penthouse apartment. So what does that do to the square footage of everything underneath it? Right? It makes it enormously expensive because he'll just tell all of the other oligarchs buy it, or they'll just want to buy it on their own. So it's a brilliant move. It's just not if you're running for president.
When you communicated with the Kremlin, I know you described you had one long conversation after trying to sort of move this along by getting in touch directly with the Russian government about the project. Was that part of the idea for Trump Tower Moscow conveyed to the Russian government? Did you talk to the Kremlin about the prospect of giving President Putin a free penthouse apartment?
I had a long conversation with the young lady who was an assistant. I don't remember all of the questions, and I don't remember how in-depth regarding the project. And it was not the first and only conversation that I had with the Kremlin. One of the questions that was asked of me was, how did you get the Kremlin's number? And I said, I Googled it. And while we were sitting in the skiff, they actually Googled it. And yeah, the Kremlin's phone number comes up. And so I asked if I can speak with the secretary or the executive assistant for President Putin. They asked me why. And the first time I asked, I wanted to invite him to Trump Tower to have a hamburger with Mr. Trump while they were here for UNGA, the United Nations General Assembly. And he wasn't going to meet with Putin, with Obama. So I figured, why not have the two of them meet? It was just, again, it was a publicity stunt that Mr. Trump had asked me to do for him.
Around the planning about that potential project, did you ever get to the point where financing for the project was discussed? Were Russian banks or Russian state-connected entities going to finance it?
No, that was always one of the problems. I had three very specific rules when I was looking at deals. The first is I had to determine that they either owned or controlled a piece of property that the Trump organization would be willing to build on. We never got past prong number one, so there was never discussion with anybody about the financing of this project. There was never a piece of property to put it on, so you didn't know how big the property could be, let alone how much it would cost.
Were Trump properties, condos and apartments and the like, were those, to your knowledge, from your time at the Trump Organization, used for money laundering purposes by organized crime figures or by foreign nationals? Did the Trump Organization do due diligence on that? There's been a lot of public reporting that some Trump properties were quite effective as large-scale money laundering mechanisms.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any of that. I never saw that. I mean, there was one allegation. I was the treasurer of several of the Trump properties where I owned apartments in. I mean, that's really where I started. I bought them as investments prior to working for Trump. And like, for example, in the building that I live, which is a Trump building, I think we had one Russian family. And over at Trump World Tower, the same thing there. There's a small percentage of the building that's Russian. I think what they were probably referring to was Trump Toronto that had Russian money behind it, as well as Trump Soho that had Russian money behind it. But to my knowledge, there was no money laundering scheme.
Let me ask you about something else that came as a total surprise to me in the book, something I didn't see coming, and I'm not quite sure what to make of it. It's a little awkward because I am a cable news host, and it's about cable news. But you write in some detail about a primetime host at the Fox News Channel speaking by phone with the president. You say the call is on your cell phone, and you've put it on speaker so the president can have this conversation, but you're there, and it's on your phone.
No, Rachel, I just connected the two calls together.
Oh, I thought this one was on speaker on your phone. Well, let me say it the way you quote it. You quote the host saying, "Mr. Trump, I can't come out publicly to endorse you at this time. It would destroy my credibility as it relates to you, but I want you to know that I am today and have always been behind you. I speak to Michael on a daily basis. Anything he has asked me to do that benefits you, I have done." I know that every cable news network is different and journalism is viewed differently by different people, but that seems like a crazy thing for somebody in the news business to pledge to a political candidate. What was going on there?
They were behind him. Look, Mr. Trump's ratings were through the roof during the campaign, and everybody wanted a piece of him. And so, what did they do? They promised him the world. They pulled a Trump on Trump. Whatever it is that he was looking for, whatever it is that he wanted, they were prepared to give it to him, so long as that they can get an exclusive, that they can get a weekly interview, that that he would make phone calls to them in order to discuss what he's doing and give them access behind the blue robes.
The other twist in this part of the book is that this Fox host who called the president and sort of pledged this secret loyalty to him, this secret, I'm behind you all the way, although I can't say so publicly. This is also somebody with whom you had an ongoing relationship. He had confided into you about some legal matters and some business interests and also things that were going wrong in his marriage and worries about a divorce. Was that a factor here? Was he saying this to the president in front of you? Is this also giving you sort of assurances, all these things that you know about me, don't worry, I'm going to be good?
Right, so let me tell you the story on this one.
All right.
Without mentioning the name. I'm sure your viewers are smart, and I think they already figured out who it is. He was, as Corey Lewandowski would put it, he was in a timeout because there was allegations that he was really for Ted Cruz. And when Mr. Trump got word of this, he went apoplectic. And he basically refused to speak to him. He wanted nothing to do with him. He was incredibly cruel to him the one time that he spoke. And, it was my job to fix it. And I did that, at which point in time he explained that despite the fact that he happens to know Ted Cruz and he likes Ted Cruz, his loyalty was to Donald Trump. He is the one who he would want to see win in 2016, and anything that he can do behind the scenes to help, he would do it. And that was enough to convince Mr. Trump in order to take him out of the penalty box and to put him back in his good grace.
And you don't think any of that dynamic had anything to do with your independent relationship with that host and you doing some basically consulting and confidant sort of work with him?
No, the confidant stuff had nothing to do with it. It was really his own need and desire as a host in order to ensure that Mr. Trump would come on his shows, as well as having the access to the candidate who was rising in the polls, who was really he was the media's sort of interest at the time. No matter, I mean, the guy would go for a rally, they would cover it beginning to end, and he wanted to be a part of it. It was for his personal needs as a talk show host.
Speaking of personal needs as a talk show host, this is now obviously becoming a slightly awkward conversation, but there's more of it ahead with Michael Cohen right after this.